name is Simmons Buntin, and good evening from Tucson, Arizona, where I'm sitting at about 2,100 feet above sea level, located among 5 gorgeous mountain ranges, the highest of which is over 9,200 feet and topped by yesterday's snow. Lower down, we're surrounded by a strange and delightful mix of cactus and blooming wildflowers, really a pretty great wildflower season this year. Spiny trees, intoxicating shrubs, and venomous critters, plus coyotes, ringtails, bobcats, mountain lions, quadrumundi, javelina, Gila monsters, tarantulas, and tarantula hawks, carpenter bees, roadrunners, hummingbirds, curved-billed thrashers, red-tailed hawks, other birds, small and large, which some of which you can see behind me, and much more here on the unceded lands of the O'odham and more recently the Yaqui. I thank them all. I also thank you for joining us this evening. Welcome to the annual Terrain.org contest winners reading. My name is Simmons Buntin. I'm the editor-in-chief of Terrain.org, the world's first online literary journal of place, with a particular focus on place, climate, and justice. I'm so glad that you're spending your Monday evening with us. Tonight, you'll hear from Hannah Smith, Tim Raphael, and Katie Duane, who will read in that order, and I'll introduce them just before they each read, and we'll leave a little time for Q&A following the reading as well. I'm sorry to report that Talia Kaluri is under the weather and without a voice, so she will not be joining us tonight, but we'll try to get her in on a future reading. And I assure you, nonetheless, this will still be a really fantastic reading. So first, before we begin with that, a few administratia. If your connection becomes slow, you may want to turn off your video. In all cases, please remain muted, but you're welcome to post your questions and other positive feedback in the chat, and we'll likely open it up to audio for questions after tonight's reading. We're recording this and all other readings. We'll make those available from Terrain.org and our YouTube channel soon. We'd love it if you would officially follow our YouTube channel, which is at youtube.com/c/terrain.org. Let me just put that right here in the chat. Okay, and our next reading will be on Earth Day, Monday, April 22nd. It's our annual National Poetry Month and Earth Day reading, and this year features Dorian Locks, Gary Soto, and Byron F. Aspis. It's hosted by Terrain.org poetry editor Derek Sheffield. So we know it's going to be terrific, and we'll have information and registration links up on Terrain.org and Facebook shortly. Hey, on that note, since I just mentioned Byron, be sure to read his really excellent recent letter to America. Let me just post that in the chat as well. Well, don't leave us during the reading to read that, but maybe set a bookmark, come back to it, and read that. You'll really enjoy it, I'm sure. Pretty powerful. And then look for 3 poems from Dorian Locks from her new book publishing in Terrain.org a few days before that April 22nd Earth Day reading. So keep an eye out. Okay, a few other announcements and words about Terrain.org, if I may. First, hey, did y'all hear that we won the 2024 AWP Small Press Publishers Award? That's pretty exciting. Woohoo! It is the highest honor bestowed upon a literary magazine by the Association of Writers and Writing Programs, and we couldn't be more honored or delighted. So thank you for your support there. And did you also hear that Chickasaw poet Ivy Liebenberg's first book, Birds at Night, won the 2024 Sowell Emerging Writers Prize, selected by Terrain.org, the Sowell Family Collection, and Texas Tech University Press? That is true. It's a stunning collection, I know, because I've read it, and it will be published by Texas Tech University Press in 2025. So keep your eyes out for that. And I apologize if I've mispronounced Ivy's last name. Pam, you can correct me. On that note, Kate Neville's Going to Seed, a stellar collection of essays, won the inaugural Sowell Emerging Writers Prize and will be published on May 15th. That's our first one in that series, and we're super excited about it. We'll have an excerpt just after it publishes in Terrain.org, so keep an eye out for that as well. And hey, more exciting news. Christian Hinz's letter to America titled A Rewilding, which was published by Terrain.org in November, will be included in the next Best American Essays anthology. This is tonight our official announcement on that, so super exciting, a double woohoo. Let me just throw that link in here. And let me admit somebody in. Welcome. Okay, the deadline for our limited run series in partnership with Spring Creek Project at Oregon State University is April 8th. That's the Climate in Action series. We're going to publish 12 pieces across genres, and each contributor will receive $200. There is no entry fee to submit, and I'm going to pull that link from over here and post that in chat as well. So that is the new Climate Stories in Action. If you're familiar with our Lookout Writing and Art About Wildfire series that we did with Spring Creek Project at Oregon State, this is very similar. So we're super excited about that. This will be full of hope and energy and optimism in light of, well, the world as we know it. Okay, finally, did you know that terrain.org is an all-volunteer organization and that we are advertisement free and free to access? Let's see, and except for contests, we do not charge to submit, nor do we ever charge to access our amazing contributions on our website. Terrain Publishing, which is terrain.org's parent organization, is a 501c3 tax-exempt organization, and it will, and we will gladly accept your donation at terrain.org/donate to help keep this endeavor of love, and it really is an endeavor of love, and place and climate and justice going. So thank you for your consideration. Let me just throw a link there. Okay, now finally, let us turn to this evening's reading, again, followed by Q&A, which I'll be moderating. I will be posting some terrain.org links in the chat in support of our readers this evening. So you can click over to those. I don't know if that's what they're reading, but you can see at least what they published in terrain.org. Also, be sure to post your thoughts and questions in chat, and we look forward to an engaging conversation following the readings. And finally, again, thanks so much for joining us. Okay, let's start with Hannah. Hannah Smith is a writer from Dallas, Texas. Her creative work has been published or is forthcoming in Best New Poets, Gulf Post, Ninth Letter, and elsewhere. Her story, Bust, was selected as winner of the terrain.org 14th Annual Contest in Fiction by Talia Lakshmi Kalluri. Let me just add that link here before we go too much further. About this story, fiction judge Talia Kalluri says, Bust is a deeply evocative story about a woman severed by trauma from a sense of connection to her body, who nevertheless is immersed in the physicality of the world around her. Lushly rendered in prose that reveals both the spare desolation of her disconnection and the corporeality of her daily life, the story reverberates like a fracking tremor. It is my pleasure to introduce Hannah Smith. Hannah, take it away.
Thanks so much. Thank you, Simmons, for organizing this reading and just everything you do at Terrain. This is truly like one of the most special literary magazines out there right now. And I'm very honored to be a part of it, reading with y'all here. This is perhaps the most indulgently Texas piece I've ever written. So I'll just read a little bit from the beginning, a couple of sections. Driving anywhere here was just a patchwork of highways and on-ramps and exits and service roads and telephone wires punctuated with little blackbirds during the 1 month of the year that it felt like anything close to fall. Each day was splatter on the windshield, the sound of humming, the sight of flat earth, expanse, and loneliness. The sky opened itself up again and again to small oil towns, passing by in a blink or a wink, or maybe something more like a twitch of a memory. The lane lines blurred into a single streak of yellow, and there was nothing on the horizon except for soft whispers of grass and the pump jacks. Dottie's dad had always said those hunks of metal were out there bobbing for apples, the way they dropped their heads towards the earth, turned over the soil and hoped they'd root up that prized black liquid, so ancient it must have originated in the book of Genesis. Dottie made the drive to town every day or two. She tried to leave by late morning to avoid the lines of semis heading east to Austin, with full tanks sloshing behind the tired drivers at the wheels. She was programmed to avoid them. She'd watched the jaws of life tear apart car doors for someone too late to appreciate them. She knew wreckage. She had seen enough Fords up in flames, was familiar with the sound of combustion. She turned onto the I-20 service road and drove past the old Rolls-Royce dealership outside the Midland Airport. Its doors closed 2 decades ago, and dandelions crept up through the cracks in the empty concrete lot. Dottie took a left and a right at the Albertsons, and then she rolled in slowly to the first window of the Boomtown Babes espresso drive-thru. The shop was barely bigger than the bed of her own truck. Its paneling was bubblegum pink, the brightest color in the basin. Cans of Red Bull lined the back wall. A cartoon blonde swung from an oil rig across the shop's facade. The window always blinked with a neon "The gals are open" sign. It had stood for 10 years at the center point between Midland and Odessa. Well now, my God, if it isn't Dottie back from vacation, the girl at the window declared as she adjusted her bra. Dottie smiled. Lacey, you know I'd hardly call Houston a vacation. Too much money talk. She reached into her back pocket to grab a small fold of cash held together by a paperclip. I'll take the usual. Lacey turned and yelled out Dottie's order to the girls working the kitchen. Dottie had often wondered about health code violations here. It seemed like someone would have checked in on the safety of a bunch of young women pouring scalding milk so close to their collarbones, their cleavage, their bare middles. But the ladies held their own. It was Lacey, after all, who'd first introduced Dottie to life down here, who'd showed her how to flash a smile that was more friendly than flirty, who'd been there when Dottie was down and needed to build herself back up. And plus, it was the men on the rigs who suffered far worse burns than hot coffee in these parts. And the men liked to forget about faraway wives at the shop, and the men did tip well when they could tip. The sheriff's own daughter worked the window on weekends. The coffee shop seemed to be one of the only places in town still bringing in business anyways. You got things sorted out down there? Lacey asked as she passed the coffee and muffin through the car window. Still a work in progress, I guess. Seem to need the old man's signature on a few things. How you holding up here? Nothing like it used to be. Almost makes me want to pull the kids from school and head back to Lubbock with my folks. Well, you've got my business. Dottie left a 20 on the counter and rolled up her window as Lacey yelled something about her money being no good there. She tucked the bill close to her left breast. The roads tangled like a bird's nest in front of Dottie as she turned out of the parking lot. She liked to drive with her window open, to hear the constant whir of tires beneath her. She never listened to the radio in the car, instead letting her thoughts float up and attach themselves to the tops of cedar elms lining the highway. She wasn't one to linger too long, and she liked the idea of letting her worst thoughts soak into the leaves like carbon dioxide, travel through corked cells of branches and trunk, and seep into the roots married to the loamy soil. She'd always assumed that was how people out here moved past anything, by taking little pieces of themselves and sequestering them into the ground. Dottie dropped her chin to consider her chest. Something about facing the breasts of the only other women she saw each week left her questioning her own body. It was a place she didn't let herself go to often. Growing up, she'd seen herself as pretty, blonde hair, fake lashes, pom-poms in hands like every other girl at Trinity Christian, proud of a full chest, proud of a high kick. She'd done a year at Tech on a full merit scholarship, but she dropped out after a hazing incident in a fraternity basement, a string of accusations, a cracked and broken memory. Her father was able to get her a job in the basin managing her uncle's man camp, and without her mother around to protest, Dottie drove herself south. It was a good enough gig, and far enough away from home. Free lodging, lots of responsibility, and a bustle when she started, with natural gas production on the rise. Her uncle let her take on any new project she wanted. Money was rolling in, and she was too preoccupied with his drinking to notice any changes she made to the place anyways. Most of the boys she'd known at Tech ended up working on the rigs. At first, she tried to avoid them, but she eventually realized they didn't remember her face at all. Even the couple guys from the basement night who boarded on her property didn't recognize Dottie. And when she took over as owner on account of her uncle's vegetative state from a head-on with an oil tanker going 90 down 285, the men just started calling her ma'am. Dottie sort of preferred it that way. Preferred to be looked past by the sweating men, their hands slicked black from nights on the rigs. Preferred to no longer think of herself as a woman. So then Dottie goes back to the Eden Lodging, which is the name of this camp that she's running. And a young resident has totally trashed his room. She cleans it up. And then I'll just skip ahead and read one more quick section. Dottie walked outside, hoping the fresh air would clear her head. She was met with the kind of dead heat that made you aware of your own body's slow decay. She crossed the parking lot to her small home attached to Eden's back entrance and slipped into the yard through the side gate. The oak in the yard was starting to lose its leaves, but only on account of the change in the sun's angles, nothing to do with temperature. It was just as hot today as it had been in the middle of summer. Fall in the Permian always felt especially apocalyptic. The dark tangle of bare branches mirrored the pump jacks themselves, the weaker limbs bobbing up and down with the wind, the grid of wood so intricately wound they must be man-made. In the privacy of her own yard, behind the 6-foot fence, Dottie allowed herself to smell her sweat, to feel her sore forearms, to breathe. It had been 14 years now, cleaning up after these men. She'd heard many of them talk about wives and daughters. She'd seen just as many forget about their families back north or east. Her fingertips carried their secrets, their messes, their waste, their desire for a richer future. She looked down at her unwashed hands, something else not part of her own body. They could have still been caked in shit or covered in a film of slippery crude, and she wouldn't have known the difference. They belonged to this world outside of herself. Dottie turned them over, examined the map of her palms, the tangle of lines like a mess of twigs collected for a nest. Her hands were the first thing she'd seen when she woke up that morning at Tech. They'd covered her eyes as if to black out the sun. Now, sitting atop the roots, pushing through the shallow earth of her yard, Dottie took those same hands, unbuttoned the top of her jeans and snuck them between her legs, let them rest on her crotch just to have these two parts of her body feel close to each other. She wondered if her opening should know the things her hands had touched, the dirt beneath nails, the calloused palms, the scars across her knuckles. But she didn't part her lips, hadn't in a decade, couldn't bring herself to go into herself, wouldn't open. She closed her eyes and leaned her head against bark. The earth rumbled, but Dottie knew it was just the oil tankers moving across highway on the other side of the fence line. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Hannah, for that powerful, visceral spare reading. I urge everybody yet, if you haven't, please go read that on terrain.org. It is a terrific story. Tim Raphael lives in northern New Mexico between the Rio Grande and Sangre de Cristo mountains with his wife, Kate. They try to lure their 3 grown children home for hikes and farm chores as often as possible. Tim's poems have appeared in a range of literary journals in the West. His poem, Prayer of a Nonbeliever, was selected as winner of the terrain.org 14th annual contest in poetry by Ross Gay. Let me just quickly post a link to that. Beautiful poem there. Okay. About this poem, poetry judge Ross Gay says, "What a beautiful poem, made of such precise and considered lines, of words that labor to sound like what they mean. Pinion-stippled hills, flake-white blossoms, petroglyph picked into basalt. And of this climb toward what is a kind of turn in the poem, which is, quote, another friend's diagnosis, unquote. It is the ever-changing land, quote, this green valley slaked on spring runoff, unquote, and are stumbling through it. That is not exactly balm for such sorrow, but at least gives us the ground upon which to join it. A poem sometimes takes us there, says Ross, for which, thank you. Tim, you're on.
Thank you, Simmons. I'm so grateful to you and everyone at terrain.org and also to Ross Gay. I'm just thrilled that he read and liked my poem. I also feel lucky to be with Hannah and Katie tonight, whose pieces I loved and they write with such clarity. I don't feel worthy, but I'm glad to be here. And also to lots of friends and family I see out there. It's great to see you. I don't want to call everyone out individually about what you've meant to my poetry journey, but maybe it's enough to just say you're a part of a small, strange demographic that is choosing poetry over Caitlin Clark in the women's tournament. So welcome. And I'll start tonight with the poem that Terrain published. Prayer of a Non-Believer. Cathartes aura, purifying breeze, is one name for a turkey vulture. And what if prayer is like that? Praise song for a scavenger. What if prayer is like this walk, the same one every day? A mantra of footsteps on mesa rock, raptors in the wind. What if it begins as a hint in the pinon-stippled hills, unfurls like a scent the dogs sense with raised snouts? I suspect there's prayer in the primrose come into flower, flake white blossoms blanketing the path, in the rhythm of my quickened pulse on the climb. And if prayer takes its time on ridgelines in scant shade, if it lingers by a petroglyph picked into basalt, two figures with hands on hips as if ready to dance, then perhaps I am learning to pray. Today, another friend's diagnosis. And who am I to scoff at believers? I too like the idea of prayer as a stand-in for clumsy words like hope, wonder, and love for this green, green valley slaked on spring runoff, for the whirl of dihedral wings and the uneven heat of rising air. Thanks. This poem's part of a group that I'll read from that seemed to be becoming a love letter to New Mexico. And the next one is called June Report. 1. Night with windows open, all sibilant sound, river and leaf whisper, the subtle difference between shush and swish, now and then a forlorn coyote, commotion of night birds, the yellow-breasted chats are here. At 2 or 3 in the morning, I slip outside, taste the honeysuckle before I see it, and find Polaris in its usual spot atop the giant cottonwood. My eyes fathom the familiar in the dark, the black brushstroke of rosebush. 2. This year is different. The water table so high, the well house has 6 inches pooled around the pressure pump. The tanagers who treat the Rio Grande like Route 66 have extended their stay. Ring-billed gulls stop by for the first time in a decade, camping on Armando's field. Butterflies I wish I could name, tiny white ones and beauties with Persian rugs for wings, tie invisible bows in the air above the yarrow. 3. The beaver dam in this run of river is taking a beating. Limbs stripped of bark and laid in an expert arc last year have been blown downstream, taking with them the glassy pond behind the dam where mayflies fell, trout rose, and at sunset, a lone beaver plowed a rippled V, off to a night shift of tree felling. Coyotes on the back ridge make their way to the river early. Just yesterday, an hour after sunup, 5 pups were out pestering the feather grass. 4. Water is all anyone wants to talk about at the co-op and post office, drought or flood, desert gossip featuring water as both homecoming queen and the kid who threw a brick through the principal's car window. Neighbors weigh whether to plant bush beans, squash, garlic, tomatoes, and everything else they coax from this hard ground. El agua es la vida is pasted on car bumpers, and the state flag might as well be a painting of cumulonimbus clouds against the blue of New Mexico sky. 5. From here, you can see the whole watershed. East, the Sangre de Cristo Mountains, the southernmost sweep of the Rockies, standing up to the Great Plains and prairie grass that otherwise might flow all the way to the Pacific. White scars of snow line the faces of Jicarita and Truchas peaks halfway through June, and snowmelt swells the creeks that funnel to the Rio Embudo, flashing through town, barreling west to the Rio Grande, then south all the way to El Paso, before easing southeast to the Gulf of Mexico. At Big Bend, the fickle river even flows north, the glint of current that still holds a piece of Jicarita briefly headed for home. Thank you. This poem is called Blue Truck, and thanks to Bristlecone Magazine for publishing it. We'll take the house if you throw in the truck, Kate said, as if we had a choice. Grass hiding the airless tires of the Dodge, a 49 flatbed with perfect patina of autumn rust and blue, as if someone had sanded dead leaves and sky into fender and door, dignity in the rotted bedboards and side rails that once held stacks of apple crates or firewood, the kind of truck you'd hop in or on if someone was headed to town, bouncing over the pitted road when there was still a bar and gas station, maybe a kid taking a turn at the wheel. Now the bench seat is all springs, but the chrome is like new. The Art Deco Ram on the hood, ready to charge up valley to the snow on Jicarita Peak. The sign Kate painted and hung at our gate says, Blue Truck, not Blue Truck Farm. We have less than 100 whipple beans in the ground, assorted beds of zinnias and cosmos, 3 rows of wine grapes, a few apple, pear, and plum trees, bush cherries, a lone apricot, and only 3 hens after I forgot to latch the coop one night. Farm is a big word when nothing is sold and what's canned or put up doesn't fill a pantry shelf, and farmer may require even more. A few generations buried in Father Cupper's cemetery, calloused hands that no longer crack in the cold, a knack for knowing whether clouds gathering in furrowed rows will bring a soaking rain. This poem is called Signposts and was published in the I-70 Review. It has an epigraph that's as follows. NMSU researcher warns massive bird die-off is an alarm. Las Cruces Sun News. Not even rain is just one thing. I hear it twice, once popcorning the corrugated roof and again dripping in tempo on flagstone. A raindrop's brief stint, like a flash of goodwill, this downpour after 78 days of nothing from the sky but ash. And cacti are reminded to bloom, the dogs chase 1,000 scents, Every thirsty thing basks in the washed air, forgetting for a moment or unaware of the glitch with rain after megafire, the rising river thick with craving, and talk of flash floods east of here, mountain forests stripped by flame, the burnt hulk of an aspen hissing a rebuke like I sometimes do. In the shrunk space between deluge and drought, now there's a plan to dim the sun with dust sprayed 12 miles high. We'd be amusing if we weren't so dangerous, planting smokestacks like signposts we were here. But I didn't mean for this to be an angry poem. A warbler made it far as our front door, and if I don't pick it up soon, the dog will. Where are those iridescent wings handed out? Yellow-rumped, ash-throated, warblers and flycatchers mid-migration, eyes shut tight, as if they keep vigil for us, arroyos lined and lit with still bright bodies. Thank you. And Simmons, I don't know if there's time for one more or
Yeah, you got time. One more.
great. Thank you. Thanks, everyone. This poem's called Deeded Land. And thank you to the Fourth River Tributaries for publishing it. Deeded Land. It's right there in the Book of Plats, D 193 at page 967, records of Rio Arriba County, our 4 acres in the vicinity of Dixon, as if even one of these cottonwoods, blaze yellow in October, could be flattened in a file drawer. A deed should be a watercolor, a series of them to catch the river's swing of steel and slate through the day, a vast palette of desert rust, all the tans, reds, and browns, but green too, a splatter of garden, and gallons of blue for New Mexico's sky. And music, moon-filled coyote cries, the town dog's reply, night frogs and day finches, the thunk of a hoe in spring. Bloodless lines of surveyor codes, track 2, section 28, T23N, leave so much out. No mention of the King of Spain or Francisco Martin, who was bestowed this land in 1725, as if no one were here before, this sweet rise on the Embudo, as if the Pueblo artisan who made this pinch pot, shattered black and white bits surfacing in dirt, has no claim 9 centuries later. Thank you so much.
Hey, thank you, Tim, for those rich and beautiful poems. Okay. And now we're on to Katie. Katie Duane is a writer, mixed media artist, and educator. She currently resides in Buffalo, New York, and teaches visual arts in the Buffalo Public Schools. Her writing has appeared in Permafrost Magazine, Sheepshead Review, and elsewhere. Her essay, Equations for a Falling Body, was selected as winner of the Terrain.org 14th Annual Contest in Nonfiction by Toni Jensen. And let me just throw a copy of that into, or the link to that anyway, into our chat. About this essay, nonfiction judge Toni Jensen says, in language both forensic and evocative, Equations for a Falling Body delves into what it's like to be stuck or in stasis. Throughout the essay, the narrator works to find meaning in moving through her everyday life. A day spent skydiving forms the plot of the piece, but the essay's real heart beats around more ever-present questions: how to live fully, how to find connection, how to feel something. The narrator's journey is told with care and precision in unexpected ways, through unexpected language and imagery. The overall effect is moving. Katie, please read for us.
Thank you, Simmons, and thank you to everyone at Terrain. I feel beyond honored to be here in the company of Tim and Hannah. So this essay is kind of segmented, so I'm just going to read a few chunks that kind of follow the main narrative of the actual skydiving incident. Free fall. When I arrived that morning at the tiny airport in Thomaston, Georgia, I saw them coming down. Little black crescents in the sky, like slices of darkened citrus fruits, cradled by the air. I could not see where they'd come from, nor where they'd land. Later, standing on the runway, I watched again as the jumpers left the airplane. Barely visible and soaring across the still, cloudless blue, its sound a faint hum trailing long after it. This could have been mistaken for any other kind of plane until, quite suddenly, there they were, tumbling one after another. Humans falling toward Earth. They were nothing more than tiny white dots at first, pinpricks of light, until they'd fallen far enough for the parachutes to open up into arcs of color, yellow, pink, ochre, black, pale green. They floated down, pinned into the air by its own sweet resistance, that silky and covert body we so easily forget exists. Anything can enter a state of free fall, a stone from a cliff, an apple from a tree, a human from an airplane. It simply requires that you let gravity do all the work. That was what I wanted, to do nothing but fall freely, to let gravity take over, succumbing to the laws of physics that I forget govern so much of my body, my existence. I wanted to be a tiny white dot in the blue sky and feel Earth pull me back to its surface. Fear. Everything about skydiving frightened me. As an adult, I've developed an irrational fear of flying. I very much dislike small planes. I don't care for heights, and I'm terrified of death. But I wanted to look at all of those things and say, so what? I wanted to feel all of that fear and then leap right into it. I remember that morning with intense clarity, driving the hour from Atlanta down to Thomaston to jump from a plane. I passed through a forest of towering loblolly pines, through pecan orchards filled with light that was sharply angled and golden, dappled and loose in its hold on earth. I drove alone. No one knew what I was about to do. I hadn't wanted anyone to worry needlessly, and I wanted no encouragement. My morning at the airport was spent sitting at a picnic table adjacent to the runway, with Garrison Keillor's good poems, watching people fly up and float down, fly up and float down. I purposely arrived early so I could watch everyone scheduled before me jump without dying. I chatted with an older couple who decided suddenly they really wanted to try skydiving. I met two teenage girls planning to jump, and their parents who stayed on the ground and signed the consent forms for their daughters. Everybody but me seemed filled with eager anticipation. I read the same poem 6 times without understanding a word before I slammed the book shut. My name appeared on a television screen next to the name Bobby. And then Bobby was strapping me in, pardoning his reach, walking me onto the plane, selecting the seat farthest from the door. As I sat on that plane, strapped into Bobby, I was still thinking about how I managed to find myself soaring noisily into the clouds over central Georgia. I mean, what the hell was I doing, really, in an airplane I was supposed to jump out of? Surely it wouldn't be as romantic as I'd imagined. And what the hell was I doing down south, waitressing again, and barely able to pay my bills? I mean, at 33, shouldn't I have a better handle on my life? Some kind of visible, palpable goal I was headed toward, a recognizable shape I could fit into. Somehow, though, falling out of the sky seemed like necessary movement toward whatever was next. So there I was, sitting, waiting until we were high enough, until Georgia became a distant patchwork of green and gold, until the air was thinner and brighter, and we were well above the clouds. I was so afraid that I felt certain I'd either collapse or explode, or both. I could not imagine a reality in which I would willingly leave that airplane at 14,000 feet, and yet this was indeed the plan. General relativity. Sir Isaac Newton proposed that gravity was the result of the masses of objects and the amount of space between them. The more massive the object, the more pull it exerts. The more distant the object, the weaker its attraction. Newton's theory explained gravitational behavior with a few exceptions across extremely short distances, such as between Mercury and the Sun, and near extremely strong gravitational fields. Something very, very dense, a black hole, for example. Albert Einstein refined Newton's laws of gravitation and proposed something radically different. That gravity was not a force, but a result of the curvature of space-time. How are space and time curved? By massive objects. Imagine you have a thick piece of foam and you throw a bowling ball onto it. What does the foam do? It curves around the shape of the ball. According to Einstein's theory, this is what objects with mass do to the fabric of space. Earth does not revolve around the sun because the sun pulls on us, but because we're falling into space curved by the sun's mass. The moon falls around the Earth, as do man-made satellites and spaceships in orbit. We fall down the curve in the fabric too, with each footstep. Each limb lifted and lowered a tiny tumble into warped space. Our mass a tether that ties us to our planet. A leap from an airplane, I reasoned, was just a bigger tumble, was stretching that tether as far as I possibly could. Leap. There are mathematical laws that dictate how things fall. My behavior upon leaving the airplane could be predicted, calculated almost exactly. But those last moments before I left the plane, incalculable. I could not even contemplate them as they were happening. I started to seriously consider the possibility that no, I could not actually leap from a plane, but I wouldn't let myself complete the thought. I was afraid I'd follow it if I did. The numinous clouds below us held steady to their form and place, their white shocking from above, their stillness disturbing as the plane bobbed and rolled each time somebody else leapt out of it. I looked around me at everyone, grins smeared across their faces, bodies leaning forward, anticipatory, each teeming with excitement. I was not excited. I was not grinning. I thought that perhaps confessing my fears to my tandem instructor might help. Bobby, I started. Are there ever people who are more afraid than excited to do this? Of course, he said. Are there many of them? Or are most people just excited? Do the people who are more afraid still do it? I could hear how small I sounded, like a shy 10-year-old, nervous about asking a potentially embarrassing question. He paused, lowering his voice so that I could still hear him over the engines, but others could not. Yes, a lot of people are afraid. And you know you do not have to do this, but you might regret it if you don't. I nodded in agreement and declared loudly, well, I'm not excited at all. I'm terrified. Terrified, Bobby shouted back. We continued shouting back and forth, each of my declarations an escalation of the previous, until the plane was nearly empty, all the other jumpers falling through the air somewhere behind and below us. Motherfucking terrified, he sang, repeating my final words as he scooted us forward along the bench toward the door. He hoisted us up to crouch in line behind the tandem pair in front of us. We would be the last to leave the plane. My toes were on that ledge very suddenly, beyond which there was nothing but open air, the earth's surface far below us. The seconds that passed as we perched there felt both like an eternity and like nothing. I remember wanting to scream, to make any kind of noise or motion, but I had been rendered both speechless and frozen. He counted 1, 2, and we were out. Equations for a falling body. It takes about 12 seconds to achieve terminal velocity, the fastest speed at which we could fall before the friction of air restrained us from accelerating any further. In 12 seconds, Bobby and I fell approximately 1,500 feet. If our terminal velocity was somewhere around 120 miles per hour, that also means we fell 176 feet per second. Say the words out loud. 1 Mississippi. In that time, we fell 176 feet. Our weight did nothing but yank us down. We were like a heavy stone through water, sinking into nothing, dropping without pause toward the bottom. We dove as we left the plane, heads down, piercing the air as narrowly as we could. There were flashes of sunlight as we pitched forward, as we rolled onto our bellies. I remember near total disorientation for a few seconds. I remember that I could not breathe for a few seconds. I remember the sensation of everything in my body being caught in my throat. But panic bled into relief as we began to stabilize, falling steadily belly down. Bobby had instructed me on the ground that the best way to fall required keeping one's body open and relaxed, but I'd of course forgotten at 14,000 feet. He uncurled my tight fists and spread my arms wide, looped his feet around my ankles, and pulled my legs long. Down we went, our soft bellies first, the air howling as we fell through it. I was never sure where to look, out at the clouds or down at the earth. If I ever skydive again, I'll watch the clouds. But this time I looked down at the earth as we plummeted towards its surface. I watched as the landscape revealed itself, as it unfolded into farmland, forests, backyards, pools, open fields, and narrow, winding roads. Math is used to calculate how things fall, to describe or predict downward acceleration due to gravity. These equations calculate the velocity at which a body falls over a particular distance on a planet with mass, and they must consider whether a body has just started falling or has been falling for some time. But what is the speed of a life? What is the distance one travels, and how much time does one get? Where does it come from, and where does it go? Thank you.
Thank you, Katie, for that powerful essay and doing something that there's no way I could ever do, just for the record. Yeah, it's all these works this evening for folks who haven't read them, or if you've read them and need to read them again, which I know you do, head on over to terrain.org for that. So now I want to open it up to questions and have a little bit of a conversation with our readers, our amazing readers this evening. Before we do that, let's give them all a round of applause. To Hannah and Tim and Katie, thank you all for such fabulous work in readings and for joining us. But before folks go, let's give you the opportunity to ask some questions. So I'm just going to check the chat here. I don't see anything so far. And so maybe I want to start then with a question while folks come up with their own that stems from something that Hannah said before she read her piece, which is that bust was her, quote, most Texas piece. And I'm intrigued by that. And that got me thinking about then Tim, who said that he, read a New Mexico series of poems, and Katie down in Georgia, where there was a little dislocation, and kind of curious what she's doing down in Atlanta. And this is a kind of a broad question, I know, but Hannah, I want to start with you. How does that landscape, that West Texas landscape, I think it's West Texas, inform or define your writing of that main character? And then for Tim and Kay, when we get to you, since you're the narrators, basically, inform sort of your narration of that piece. And I'm particularly interested in voice and tone here. In other words, how is the landscape informing or defining that tone of this particular piece? Anna, can I ask you that very big question? I know.
Yeah. I think about that question all the time with my own writing. I'm a poet first and foremost. This is actually my first fiction piece I've ever published.
Wow.
But I also thought of it as indulgently Texas. I think that, the story opens in a car, and a lot of us here, especially in like the West, Southwest, where things are very spread out, like I'm in the car a lot. Texas is obviously a large state. And I think there's something about seeing landscape through like via movement in a car in transit that I just as a writer think about a lot, and how the landscape, in Texas, you can drive 5 hours and it looks the same. There's not always a lot of elevation change. So something about, like the flatness of it, the sparseness, and the only things interrupting horizon lines being like either trees or man-made objects, and thinking about that in West Texas as how the oil industry interrupts the way that the landscape looks. With the character in particular, I've been thinking about like interruptions in the land and interrupt as like mirrored in interruptions in a sort of experience in self in the body. But yeah, it's a great question. I'd have to perhaps think about it more, but I think those are sort of the first things that come to mind. And a lot of overlap actually, Tim, between West Texas and New Mexico, which was like fantastic to hear those back to back, but I'll let other people answer this.
Thank you, Hannah. Tim, what do you say?
Wow. Smart question without maybe a smart answer. Kate and I moved to northern New Mexico 5 years ago, and I just it really was love at first sight with this landscape, and I think these poems, which mostly stem from a morning walk, which is really an unbreakable ritual of mine every day, are just an attempt to find words sufficient to this land, light, and sky, which I don't feel like I've come to yet. It just is it's a remarkable place that has reopened curiosity in me and sparked, I think, an ability to pay closer attention than I have before, and it's been kind of a remarkable rebirth this last 5 years. So yeah, I think the landscape infuses every line of every poem that I write. I think.
Thank you. Katie, how about in your piece, which maybe takes a different, more atmospheric approach, you might say?
Yeah, I think, well, part of the essay that I didn't read, captured my choice to move to Georgia several years ago. And so I definitely felt kind of like an alien in an alien landscape. And so I think the leap through the air and the skydiving and witnessing the Georgia landscape, whether it was from the sky or just being there, was analogous to my sense that I sort of felt really lost, and I was really learning to reorient myself and figure out how I was attached or connected to that landscape and why I was there. And so I think a big part of the landscape for me in that essay was figuring out where I belonged there and why I was there and how to get to the next place. Because I went skydiving when I'd only been there a couple of months. And doing that kind of helped me feel connected to why I was there, which was it was the sort of fall into a new era or time in my life when I purposely departed the previous place and previous life that I've been living. I don't know if that answers the question very well.
Sure. Of course, the next logical question is, have you been skydiving again?
No, I don't think I'll do it again.
Okay. Who else has questions for us? Here's one from Carrie. Do you want to unmute and ask that question? Or I can ask. Oh, go ahead.
There, I guess I really love the organization of your essay into titled parts, and I'm just wondering if it how that evolved.
Sure. So I started the essay a long time ago, right after or shortly after I skydived. And so I think it kind of just grew from little chunks that I was writing when I was able to write them. Like a lot of the more introspective and parts where I kind of answered some of the question I'd been asking, those came much later. And so it sort of organized itself into different strands or collage pieces, whatever you want to call them. But I also think that I wanted to kind of tackle a lot of different ideas simultaneously. And so organizing it in that format allowed me to sort of set everything next to each other and then find those linked threads between each section. Because I'll revisit little bits from one in another section. But I think a lot of it had to do with just when I was ready and able to write about certain parts of that experience. They kind of fell into their own little categories as time moved forward. And it felt like a segmented experience. So I think the segmented structure kind of helped echo that for me.
Thanks.
Right, thanks.
Nice. I love the mixture of science and, like you said, introspection. It's unexpected and lovely.
Thank you.
So Tim, that might be a question for you as well. I mean, you had some numbered, at least one, the longer numbered poem that you read. What do you think?
um, I most of these are not overly worked over. That June report with the numbered entry sort of it sort of came out that way and felt like just kind of a chronicling of what felt like a remarkable and different June in all different aspects, from the way the water was running to the animals that were migrating that we hadn't seen in a long time. And so I don't know. I mean, I don't feel like I'm an expert at all in poetry structure. I saw my wise teacher, John Brem, was on this call earlier and has just been super helpful in thinking through structure and line length and all of those different things. But mostly I write in sort of shorter lines. They're obviously very narrative and don't deviate very much. That numbered poem is actually a little bit unusual that way.
Okay, thanks. Hannah, do you want to respond to that? Or if not, I have another question for you that's in the queue, I see.
I respond to which question?
The former question about sort of sections and how you piece something together, which, I mean, really that does tie into, I think, Kate's question to you in the chat. Kate, do you want to ask that?
Hi, Hannah. Thanks so much for reading to us. I'm not sure if you've written a lot of fiction or whether you said this was the first one you've written and had published, which is, I don't know baseball but very well, but that's a good ratio of bats to pitches. Anyway, I just really want to know what you enjoy about writing fiction.
I enjoy getting to be a liar. It's nice to not write from my own personal experience, which is usually how I kind of get into a poem. And to just think about my considerations of like what I've worked towards with a poetry manuscript from a different genre. I know there's a lot of kind of overlap in terms of my obsessions with like land and place and body and gender politics in a place like Texas. But it's good to, I think, sometimes like get a little bit of distance from your own kind of personal like heart in the way that you write. But yeah, thanks for that question. I don't really write a lot of fiction. I would love to try to write more, but I think I am a lazy writer and I like writing with fewer words. I also love lines. So Tim, I was loving what you were saying about thinking about the line in prose. I think is just such a different experience to lose something that poetry allows you to gain with like double meanings and that sort of thing. So it feels very challenging to me, but fun to challenge yourself sometimes, I think.
Hannah, Stephanie says that you can line poems too, so you have our permission there.
Yeah, poetry in the court of law is received as fiction. Just, I don't know if that feels like important for any of the poets in the room to know.
Yes, and we can sometimes imagine scenes in nonfiction too, I think. Other questions? I'm not seeing anything else in the chat. Except a nice note from Hannah Smith that Katie, your essay reminds her of Annie Dillard's Total Eclipse. Not a bad comparison. Anything else? Any questions from folks I'm missing? No? Okay, well then let's please give our readers this evening another round of applause. Thank you all so much, Hannah Smith and Tim Raphael and Katie Duane, for your amazing work, and congratulations on your awards in terrain.org. I know we all love these pieces very much. And thank you all for joining us this evening. Join us on April 22nd for our next reading. and then check our website in the next couple days. We'll have information up on that soon. So again, thank you all and have a wonderful evening.